Yeah, first of all, I think it is outrageous this bill has been guillotined through, because I still haven't fully understood all of the implications of it. And I think that's wrong. I would consider myself fairly, clued in and focused on the issue of housing as our housing spokesperson. But I don't believe this is getting adequate scrutiny as to what precisely it's doing. So to me, that's a problem, and is a matter of concern. I mean, probably we'll vote for it, but I do want to listen. I listened to the Minister earlier on. I listened to what the Junior Minister says after, but I would be concerned. There's no more important subject than housing and the delivery of social and affordable housing by AHBs in terms of cost rental, given the absolutely atrocious housing crisis we have in this country. So I am concerned about something being rammed through dealing with approved housing bodies and with the cost rental sector in this manner. It's way out of order. And this is the kind of place where things can be done which could have consequences that could be of concern. And I mean, first of all, in terms of the bill's own stated objectives, we're allowing registration. If I understood the Minister earlier on, that we'll sort of register all AHBs who are going to go over this cliff edge because they're technically not eligible, if I understood it correctly. So we're going to rectify that so that they can continue to operate, because otherwise they would become unregistered, if I understood it correctly. Now, and this has something to do with our constitutional objectives and the question of meeting housing need. So I didn't get any examples from the Minister in his speech as to examples of where there was a problem in terms of the constitutional objects, if I understood him correctly, of AHBs in terms of their property. What might be the problem? We need examples as to why that might be a problem. What other objectives might they have for their assets, for their property, that isn't about alleviating housing need? At the very least you owe us is an explanation as to what those problems might be. And one thing I just have to say is that I have a concern, given the experience of the growth of the AHB sector in Britain as a substitute for local authority housing. And don't get me wrong, I recognise the role that AHBs play, and many of them do a very, very good job in providing social housing, and now some of it cost rental housing. But I'm also worried that some of these AHBs, particularly in the UK, have developed commercial agendas and imperatives which are not really about the provision of social housing, but that they become quite corporate. So I just wouldn't like to see anything that's slipping in under the radar which is going to allow that sort of situation to develop, particularly because, I mean, certainly when I look at my area, when you look at most of the new social housing that's coming on stream, most of it is coming via the AHBs rather than the local authorities. For all the government's talk about ramping up social housing delivery, actually most of it is not local authorities creating new council housing. It is stuff that is being delivered via the AHBs or bought by the AHBs and is going to be then managed and run by the AHBs. So, like I said, I think they should play a role in the delivery of social housing, and many of them do commendable work, but I have a serious concern about the continued retreat of the local authorities in terms of being the central driving force in delivering social housing. I also personally believe there's a longer term agenda. In fact, it's fairly well articulated at a lot of meetings of housing experts and groups about essentially doing away with differential rents as we know them in local authority rents and replacing them with cost rental, effectively doing away with social housing for a lot of people in the long term. I believe that's an agenda. I think that certain people think local authority rents are too low and that we need to increase them, and that cost rental is, if you like, a vehicle, and keeping social housing thresholds fairly low is a vehicle to do away with traditional council rent and differential rent. So I'm concerned about all of these things. I'll also, seeing as we're discussing AHBs, express concern about a particular development in my own area, which I hope the department will look into, Saint Germain in Ballybrack Village, which has been was bought in conjunction with the council by an AHB, and the tenants moved in 3 to 6 months ago. There's 31 families in there, 31 homes, mostly women and young children. The place is chronic with damp. This is a new build and there's damp everywhere, right? Now these families were delighted after many years on housing lists to get housed, but it is absolutely shocking beyond belief that houses that were newly built and that people have just moved into are rank with damp. I mean, are we here, are we here all over again with the Celtic Tiger stuff in terms of stuff that's being built and now bought for social and affordable housing with public money, that there's serious defects in stuff that we're buying for social housing? So that needs to be looked into as a matter of urgency. I've advised the tenants who I'm working with now. There's also problems in terms of the green areas, the buildings not being built to the plans according to the tenants. And indeed, I wonder about the role of the local authority, seeing as they were bought in conjunction with the local authority. But even that relationship between approved housing bodies and local authorities is a very important one, and that's why legislation that's sort of dealing with that I really worry about. Because is this going to sort of create less accountability in terms of what approved housing bodies do in terms of the delivery of social housing? Because somebody didn't do their due diligence here, if the place is rank with damp. And according to the tenants at least, it's not built to the plans. The green areas, for example, that were designated are they're not taking responsibility for them. They're not built as certainly as people understood from the plans. So I hope something is done about that. I have advised the tenants that they have the right to go to the RTB, but quite frankly, they shouldn't have to be going to the RTB after 3 to 6 months in new social housing. It's unbelievable. And it's not the first instance of this I've heard, I should add. I also just mentioned very, very quickly, now I hope it's a better story and it's slightly on the other end of the spectrum, but we've been campaigning for many years now to get the state to buy the St Helens Court development in Dunleary, which was in the hands of 2 different vulture funds who tried to mass evict all of the tenants, essentially to drive up the value of it, because if you evict all the tenants, you can then increase the rent. There have been 15, now up to 17 of those apartments in that development sitting empty for up to almost a decade. Right across the road from my office. It's absolutely shameful. So these vulture funds tried to mass evict people only because we resisted and protested and campaigned. Did none of those tenants get made homeless? And we campaigned to get the state to buy them so they could be provided for social and affordable housing. But nearly a decade on, they're still empty. Now I understand that Clwyd were trying to buy them and so it fell through. Last I heard was Simon were trying to buy them, and it would be a victory for People Power and our campaign if eventually they're bought. But why on earth is it taking this long? Now in this case maybe there's due diligence being done, right? But that's a lot of due diligence, and I see the places being perfectly refurbished. It's an insult to families who are homeless in our area, who are in emergency accommodation hostels in town, who are coming into my office week in, week out in desperate housing crisis situations, and right across the road, 17 apartments empty. Empty, perfectly good apartments. In fact, they've been refurbished a number of years ago, and they are sitting empty. It's a disgrace. Still in the hands of a vulture fund. Hopefully soon in the hands of an approved housing body. But again, I don't quite know, why is it not the local authority that's taking them? I don't really understand that. Like, why? Who's making these decisions that it's the approved housing body, not the local authority? Because most of the purchases, and I'm in favour of these, I want to see more of these purchases given the slow delivery of direct construction of social and affordable housing, but can we do it right? So, yeah, that's another point I wanted to make. Cost rental, to move on to the cost rental end of things. There's a big problem with cost rental. I think some of the others may have alluded to it. I've raised it several times. To be eligible for cost rental, you need to have an income below 66,000, or if you're single, above below 66,000 and above 40,000 if you're single, above 40,500, slightly bigger, all the way up to about 48,000 for some of the biggest families. That's in our area. I know these vary from area to area. Now, the problem is, most of the people who are just over the social housing income threshold will not be eligible because they will be considered unable to pay the rents that are being charged for the cost rental. They will be within the bracket, not entitled to social housing, earning but in between these two brackets, but because the approved housing bodies, the developers, or whoever it is who's running the cost rental are charging rents that are too high, they will be told, no, you can't afford that rent. You're not eligible. And these are precisely the people who've been hard done by on the refusal of the government to raise the social housing income thresholds. Many of these people will be people who've been on housing lists for 10 or 15 years, thinking eventually I'll get there, eventually I'll get allocated a social home, then they get a pay rise which takes them slightly over the income threshold. They're no longer, all their 15 years waiting on the social housing list is gone, and now they're not entitled to cost rental either because their income is still too low because it's just over the threshold and not enough to pay the rents which are being charged in the cost rental. 1,400 for a 2-bed, 1,200, 1,300. I mean, I rang a council worker who got knocked off the social housing list and was, really frustrated about that fact. An outdoor worker in the council when the new cost rental were being delivered in Enniskerry, and I rang him real excited and I said, look, I know you lost all your years on the social housing list, but you might be able to get one of these cost rental. And then he took one look at it and he said, you must be kidding. I'm a council worker, the rent is 1,200 a month, I'm a single person. How could I possibly afford that? How could I possibly afford it? And of course he's right, he can't afford it, but he's not entitled to social housing either. So something has to be done about this. Either we lower the rents for the cost rental based on people's income and ability to pay, or we raise significantly the social housing income thresholds to make those who are caught in this limbo position eligible for something. And of course, if you go over the threshold, you're also not entitled to HAP. So you're not entitled to anything. You're completely caught in limbo. Can't afford the cost rental, can't get HAP to get stuff in the private market, not entitled to social housing. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. What happens if you're in a cost rental house? This bill should have dealt with it. If your income goes down, what happens if you're deemed eligible on income grounds, but then your income goes down? You lose your job, some reason your income goes down, and you go below the threshold. Or maybe you just goes down, you're still within the cost rental limits, but you now have less money to pay the rent, which is fixed because it's not based on your income. What are you supposed to do? Will you get any financial support in the form of HAP? No, because you're over the social housing threshold. You should do, but you won't, unless this is rectified. Or if you go below the social housing income thresholds, will the cost rental tenancy now become a social housing tenancy? Because you're now below the threshold for social housing. and above the threshold, below for cost rental, should I say, the other way around, right? These issues need to be addressed, and they're not being addressed. Then there's this business in this bill about the allocation scheme for cost rental, which, as I understand it, now there is a problem. Currently, it's a lottery, right? It's a lottery to get it. Now, that is fair enough at one level. It's a bit fairer than what's going to happen in Dunleary with the affordable housing in Shanganagh this Wednesday, where I'd say the scandal over the, was it the Oasis tickets, will look like a tea party compared to what's going to happen in Dunleary on the website when the 50 or so affordable houses go up, and it's whoever gets in first at 12 o'clock. I suspect the Dunleary Ratdown website is probably going to crash, and what happens then, right? Which wouldn't surprise me if it crashes, because there will be such a demand for those houses. I don't see how it's possibly fair, to be honest, right? Because it's all about, you know, I mean, the amount of hoops you have to jump to online is going to be a nightmare for huge numbers of people, right? It's going to be an absolute nightmare. We'll see how that works out. But we have to have a fair allocation scheme for these things, right? And in this bill, if I understand it, landlords and developers can make an allocation scheme which is different from the local authority allocation scheme. Now, the local authority allocation scheme is problematic, but at least it's democratically accountable. At least there's some prospect of elected representatives of the people saying we need to change the housing allocation scheme to, say, for example, prioritise homeless people. But on what basis will they be changing the allocation scheme? And who will they be accountable to in that regard? So I have concerns about their ability or their right to do it, or what sort of allocation scheme they might establish. And I mean, one group of people I personally believe should get some priority are precisely those people who may have had 10 or 15 years on a housing list and lost them all because they went a few quid over the threshold. I mean, it's going to be any dispensation for them after all those years waiting to just lose it all. But then, you know, they're like in a lottery with limited opportunities probably, or chances of actually ending up at a cost rental home. So there needs to be very serious deliberation about how we are going to do the allocations, and I'm a bit worried when we have so many different approved housing bodies. It's such a fragmented sector about what sort of allocation schemes they might come up with, how exactly all of that is made transparent, that there's accountability, that there's consistency, that there's fairness, and so on. I would be concerned. Very last point, it is a more general point, but you know, it's incredible to me that in the budget last week, with the biggest budget surplus the state has probably ever seen, and with the 13 billion extra available from the Apple tax money, that the government announced plans for social and affordable housing where there was not a single extra social, affordable or cost rental over and above what had been previously committed in a plan that is failing disastrously and is not impacting on the level of homelessness and the housing crisis that is blighting the lives of thousands and thousands of people. I cannot understand. I mean, whatever about using once-off windfall payments for current expenditure, it makes absolute prudential sense, as well as societal sense, to put those billions into ramping up dramatically the amount of social and affordable housing, and making sure that that social and affordable housing is actually affordable for people, for the people it's supposed to be assisting. And we got nothing new in the budget on any of that, which is really, really shocking, and begs the question, are the government serious at all about trying to solve this problem?